Welcome students in lecture number 38 of statistics. In this video lecture, we will learn how to do hypothesis testing about difference between proportions of two populations. So let me start by stating the steps of hypothesis testing. Step number 1 is step 1 state null hypothesis. Because we are considering here two populations and we are taking the parameter as population proportion. So in null hypothesis, we suppose that the proportions in two populations of particular thing is equal, where P1 is proportion in population 1, P2 is proportion in population number 2. यहाँ पर proportion का मतलब है percentage of particular thing, percentage or number. If number is given, then we have to find the fraction by dividing that number by total number of elements in the population. That will give us the proportion of that particular thing in that population. Or percentage is itself a proportion, so we need not to divide it by any number. So first we state the null hypothesis, and null hypothesis is always about no difference, that there is no difference between the proportions obtained from the two populations. Step number 2 is state alternative hypothesis. That is always denoted by H1, and that depends upon what we want to test. If we want to test that the two proportions are not equal, then we take this alternative hypothesis. If we want to test that proportion of first population is greater than proportion of second population, then we take this alternative hypothesis. And if we want to test that proportion of first population is less than proportion of second population, then we take this alternative hypothesis. This is basically two-tailed test, because here critical region lies in both sides. Here critical region lies to the right hand side, so this is called right tail test. And in this case critical region lies to the left hand side, so it is called left tail test. Step number 3 is set label of significance. Label of significance is denoted by alpha, and it is basically either 10% or 5% or whatever is given in the question. Step number 4 is compute the value of test statistics. Test statistics means the value of Z, क्योंकि हमें पता है जो sampling distribution of difference between sample proportions होता है, that is always normal in shape. for large sample size, and we check one of the factor that the product of n into p, 1 should be greater than 5, and n2 into p2 is also greater than 5. So we check these two factors, and n1 n2 should be greater than or equal to 30. Then we can use we can say that the shape of the distribution, sampling distribution of difference between two sample proportions, two yes, is normal in shape, and the value of z is given by p1 cap minus p2 cap minus p1 minus p2 whole divided by standard error of difference between standard error of sampling distribution of difference between two sample proportions, where p1 cap is the proportion of sample 1, p2 cap is the proportion of sample 2, p1 is the proportion of population 1, p2 is the proportion of population 2, and the value of sigma is sigma p1 cap minus p2 cap is square root of p1 q1 upon n1 plus p2 q2 upon n2, where n1 is the size of the sample 1, n2 is the size of sample 2. N2 is size of sample 2, which is drawn from the population number 2. And if P1, P2 are not known, means population proportion is not known, in that case we find the weighted average value of sample proportion by using the formula n1 p1 cap plus n2 p2 cap whole divided by n1 plus n2, and we use this weighted average value of population proportions to estimate sorry this is the weighted average value of two sample proportions. So we use this to estimate the proportions of two populations by assuming that they have same proportions. So in that case, sigma p1 cap minus p2 cap is given by p bar q bar into 1 upon n1 plus 1 upon n2. So this value is used when p1, p2 are not known. So we use this formula of sigma to estimate the values of p1 and p2 by assuming that p1 is equal to p2 and they both are equal to p bar. So we were at step number 4. So step number 5 is find critical value from standard normal table, or you know that this value, critical value, depends upon the level of significance and the type of the test, whether it is two-tailed or one-tailed. And together finding the value, critical value, we also draw critical region, also draw critical and acceptance region. Step number 6 is compare the value of test statistics with that of critical value, or check whether test statistic value falls in critical region or acceptance region. क्रिटिकल रीजन में फॉल हो रही है वैल्यू या एक्सेप्टेंस रीजन में फॉल हो रही है, हम ये चेक करते हैं. एंड अकॉर्डिंगली accept or reject the null hypothesis. Okay. So these are the steps to test the hypothesis about difference between two population proportions. Let us take one example. Example number 1. Random samples of 400 men and 600 women were asked whether they would like to have a flyover near their residence. "200 men and 325 women were in favor of the proposal." Test the hypothesis that proportions of men and women in favor of the proposal are same against that they are not at 5% level of significance. क्वेश्चन क्या है एक बार समझ लीजिए 400 मैन और 600 women का सैंपल लिया गया मतलब एक तरह से एक पॉपुलेशन मैन की एक पॉपुलेशन women की है और उस पॉपुलेशन से एक पॉपुलेशन से 400 का सैंपल लिया गया और दूसरी पॉपुलेशन से 600 का तो उन दोनों से अलग अलग ये पूछा गया कि क्या उन्हें अपने घर के पास फ्लाईओवर चाहिए तो 400 में से 200 ने ये रिप्लाई किया कि दे आर इन फेवर ऑफ द प्रपोजल और 325 वुमेन भी फेवर में थी प्रपोजल के तो हमें ये हाइपोथेसिस टेस्ट करनी है कि proportions of men and women in favor of the proposal are same against that they are not means जो proportion है men और women का फेवर में वो सेम है दोनों पॉपुलेशंस में और ऑल्टरनेटिव हमें ये लेनी है that the proportion is not same. So null hypothesis would be here that proportion of men in favor of having flyover near their residence is same as proportion of women. Okay. There is no difference in their opinions having the proposal near their residence. And alternative would be that the proportion is not same. So it is two-tailed test. Alpha is given to us as 5%. Value of Z here is because population proportion is not known here. So we find the value of P bar which is equal to N1 P1 cap plus N2 P2 cap whole divided by N1 plus N2 and then we use the formula here that P1 cap minus P2 cap minus P1 minus P2 whole divided by square root of P bar Q bar into 1 upon N1 plus 1 upon N2. So first of all we calculate P bar which is equal to 400 into P1 bar is 200 divided by 400 plus 600 325 divided by 600 whole divided by 400 plus 600. So that comes out to be 0.525. So we calculate Z now, which is 0.5. 0.5 कैसे आया? ये P1 कैप और P2 कैप का डिफरेंस. P1 कैप है 200 divided by 400 और P2 कैप है 325 divided by 600 minus this is P1 cap, sorry, and P2 cap is 0.541. P1 cap minus P2 cap, and the difference of P1 and P2 is 0, divided by square root of 0.525 into 0.475. This is 400 here and 600. So that comes out to be minus 1.269. Now we draw critical and acceptance region. Here we have Z equal to 0, and because we have two-tailed test, so alpha is divided into two parts. Each one contains the area equal to 2.5%, 2.5%, 2.5%. This area is 95%. This is acceptance region. And this is critical region. This is critical region. So value of Z alpha by 2 comes out to be 1.269, sorry, 1.96. This is minus 1.96. ये value कैसे आएगी? You subtract 0.025 from 0.5 and then look for this area into the table. That will give you this value. So you can see that this minus 1.269 is coming into the acceptance region. That's why null hypothesis will be accepted at 5% level of significance. So you will write here, since minus 1.269 lies in acceptance region, so null hypothesis is accepted at 5% level of significance. Null hypothesis मतलब क्या थी आपकी कि there is no difference in the opinions of men and women having the flyover near their residence. Next example is in two large populations, there are 30 and 25% respectively of blue-eyed people. मतलब दो लार्ज पॉपुलेशंस हैं जिसमें एक पॉपुलेशन में 30% ब्लू आइड पीपल हैं और एक पॉपुलेशन में 25% ब्लू आइड पीपल हैं. Is this difference likely to be hidden in samples of 1200 and 900 respectively from the two populations. तो यहाँ पर हमें क्या गिवन है, हमें n1 की वैल्यू गिवन है 1200, n2 की वैल्यू गिवन है 900 and P1 proportion of people having blue eye in first population is 30%, that is 0.30, and P2 here is 0.25. So null hypothesis would be that in two populations there is no difference in the number of people having blue eye. So P1 is equal to P2, where H1 is P1 not equal to P2. And the value of Z is P1 cap minus P2 cap minus P1 minus P2 divided by P1 Q1 upon N1 plus P2 Q2 upon N2. तो यहाँ पर हमें P1 कैप P2 कैप गिवन नहीं है, लेकिन यहाँ पर जो आप नल हाइपोथेसिस लेंगे, that null hypothesis would be about sample proportions, क्योंकि हमसे सैंपल में डिफरेंस पूछा गया है, ये हिडन है या नहीं. तो यहाँ पर हम P1 कैप P2 कैप रखेंगे and this is okay. So this value of P1 minus P2, जब भी ऐसी सिचुएशन आती है, whenever we are asked to have the difference, we are asked to whether the sample information have the difference between the proportions. So we put the hypothesis about the sample proportions. And this value is kept because this value is always 0. So this value is kept under mod. So the difference is kept under mod like this. So basically the value of Z is the formula for Z is P1 minus P2 whole divided by square root of P1 Q1 over N1 plus P2 Q2 over N2. So the value of Z will be 0.30 minus 0.25 whole divided by square root of 0.3 into 0.7 divided by 1200 plus 0.25 into 0.75 whole divided by 900. That gives us 2.56. क्योंकि सैंपल साइज बहुत लार्ज है इसलिए हम सैंपल को एज अ पॉपुलेशन कंसीडर कर सकते हैं. ओके इसीलिए ये हाइपोथेसिस अबाउट सैंपल रखी गई है क्योंकि हमसे सैंपल में डिफरेंस हिडन है या नहीं ये पूछा गया है. So because you are not given the level of significance and this is two-tailed test, we take the alpha is equal to 5% because ये third stage में ही करना था हमें यहाँ पर alpha is equal to 5%. This is ये यहाँ पर आप लिखेंगे alpha is equal to 5% क्योंकि ये स्टेप नंबर 3 है. तो अभी हमने इससे पहले जो क्वेश्चंस किया था उसमें क्रिटिकल वैल्यू आई थी 1.96 and this was critical region. This is acceptance region. The value of Z falls in the critical region. So null hypothesis is rejected. So we can say that the difference hidden in the sample also. Okay. जो पॉपुलेशन में डिफरेंस दिख रहा है वो सैंपल में भी डिफरेंस है. तो ये मार्किंग लेबलिंग मैं कर देती हूँ यहाँ पर. दिस इज क्रिटिकल रीजन. ये लेबलिंग आपको जरूर करनी है. Acceptance region. This is critical value. This is critical value. और यहाँ कहीं टेस्ट स्टैटिस्टिक्स की वैल्यू फॉल हो रही है. वैल्यू ऑफ टेस्ट स्टैटिस्टिक्स. इसलिए null hypothesis is rejected. Rejected. यहाँ पर आप लिखेंगे mod Z is greater than 1.96. ठीक है. Null hypothesis is rejected at 5% level of significance. Thank you very much. इससे आगे हम नेक्स्ट लेक्चर में पढ़ेंगे. Okay, thank you so much.